So I originally planned for this video to focus on sensor fusion, which was added to a couple of airframes, most notably the Eurofighters and Rafale, essentially seeing if using countermeasure slaving to more is actually viable now. But as you'll see shortly, there isn't really a video's worth of content in that, so instead this is just going to be some AirRB gameplay with my usual commentary and sensor view breakdowns in the Eurofighter. Before that though, this game in the background here was my very first game from about a month ago where I planned to test sensor fusion. Initially I decided in this game I wasn't going to touch my countermeasure binds at all. This means I can see exactly how effective the more actually is and what it seems to be doing. Now in a moment you're going to see my RWR start going off as the initial wave of missiles heads my way. Now note how this is not triggering any countermeasure release. Your RWR alone cannot trigger this, only your more. Just your more is going to use information from the RWR to decide what kind of threat is coming for you. I'll pause it here as the more gets triggered. So as a quick overview, if you didn't know the difference, your more is this missile icon on the outer ring of my RWR here, and as I play it through you'll see it makes a slightly different sound. This is what countermeasure slaving is triggered by. Previously on all airframes with this feature, this being triggered would aggressively dump both chaff and flares. Now on airframes affected by the sensor fusion update, it is supposed to be able to distinguish between IR and radar missiles using information from the RWR. But remember, the more must see the threat for this to work. So in the clip, my more has now picked up a Fox 3 that is tracking me. After I play it through again, you'll see my plane start popping chaff automatically, and I do manage to defeat these launches. The issue is, when missiles get this close, I'd want to be chaffing much more aggressively than my more is, intending to either brute force the missile into biting on the chaff, or if it's angle gating me, to ensure it stays in IOG and I can dodge it with my trajectory. With Fox 3s especially, I've been finding the more often doesn't trigger until the missile is much closer than I'd like, and sometimes barely triggers at all, which I'll show you shortly. I'll play this through now so you can see all this in action. Now again, as I'm playing this through, I will just point out that obviously in this match I was testing not touching my countermeasure binds at all, but this was purely just to test the more. Even if the more was very effective, I still wouldn't recommend, not using your countermeasure binds at all. And based on how the more's working, I'm, going to outright recommend that you don't rely on it at all, essentially. So I'm just going to fire on these two guys that pop up down low here. And as I was just saying, so my kind of takeaway on more is, on the Eurofighter especially, there's not really any reason not to leave it on, because you've got enough countermeasures by flare and chaff with the BLL pods that it's kind of like harmless to leave on just for that extra bit of security. And now you're going to see why you can't rely on the more, so I'm going to get a PL12 pop up on my left. I've got it in the notch pretty quickly, but you're going to see that my more isn't getting triggered until the last second by this missile, so my plane is not chaffing it, and obviously I'm not touching my binds right now. It only gets triggered at the last second there, and my plane just pops out one chaff, but the missile's too close and that's not sufficient to defeat it. So this is why you can't rely on it, especially for those Fox relaunches, because for whatever reason sometimes the more just straight up doesn't really see the missile. Now the next short clip in the Rafale is to show the other issue with more, which has been present since its introduction, and that is false positive IR threats. It has a tendency to be very sensitive to both friendly launches and even flares. Now on the Eurofighter this is generally okay because you have enough flares that you never run out, hence why I'm saying you can get away with just leaving it on despite the issues I'm describing. However, in the Rafale your flare count is very limited, and in this clip here watch how many of them it starts dumping when my more goes off. Even if this was a genuine threat it would be excessive, but in this example there is no actual threats in this direction, so it's straight up wasting my countermeasures. I'll show you a clip in the Eurofighter of this as well, as I'm getting a nice top-down attack. Pay attention to my more throughout this clip, look at where the apparent threats are coming from, and see how it's getting triggered and wasting flares on friendly launches that aren't targeted at me. Again, it's not a huge issue in the Eurofighter, it's just good to be aware of these issues. Oh, and as a side note here, notice how my HMD doesn't want to lock the Hornet on the left for some reason, and see how I very quickly switch to ACM and immediately get the lock. It's a bit of advice I like to throw around quite a lot, is if your HMD isn't cooperating, try switching to ACM or narrowband TWS and see if you can't pick up the lock that way. Now for the rest of the video I'm going to break down some Eurofighter gameplay and AirRB. One of the main things I want to talk about regarding the Eurofighter is how to leverage the extremely powerful engines and flight model. One trap people fall into when climbing aggressively for the BVR phase at the start of the match is forgetting that the thinner air means it's a lot harder to turn into your notch in time. Then couple that with the fact that up at this altitude missiles are able to gain and hold a lot more energy due to the lower drag, and you can find that missiles are hitting you much faster than you are prepared for. The Eurofighter however has the performance to deal with this very easily. In the background you just watched me defend multiple launches comfortably and efficiently. So let's have a look at that one in sensor view. It can be a little hard to follow with all the missiles in the frame, but just look at the various missiles trying to find me. If you keep an eye on the grey IOG cones, you'll see that some of them even fail to pick me up and go terminal. Because I'm travelling so fast and they haven't received sufficient data link, they are unable to find me because I've long since escaped their FOV by the time they're in range. The few that do find me, I'm able to pitch down into an aggressive notch and divert them with some chaff. I'll cut ahead in that same game now as I'm trying to keep an F-15 away from my team. Now, one thing I didn't account for here is my team that are sort of covering me from below down on my right have sort of disappeared. So as I fire on the F-15 here, I get pings from enemies that have managed to get underneath me quite close. So I'm in a bad position here, and that Mirage has fired a Mika at me. As I did this live, I thought I just managed to pull off the notch here. But after I defeat this missile here, I'm going to cut to sensor view so we can see what actually happened. This clip is a great look at both the Eurofighter's ability to kinetically defeat missiles even at close range like this, and also how much performance the Mika loses once the motor burns out. As the Mika's performance is heavily linked to its thrust vectoring motor, once it burns out it can't pull nearly as hard and burns a lot of energy when it has to make any turns. I'm going to play this through on half speed just so you can follow along more easily. At first you see it accelerate to Mach 3 very quickly, but at roughly this point the motor burns out. Now watch as it can't quite pull hard enough anymore to follow my aggressive defense. Also watch how quickly it loses all of its speed. I notch it briefly, but angle gating causes it to keep track of me, but due to the loss in performance it simply can't catch me. On the topic of energy, I have tons of these early game defense clips. In the Eurofighter, this pretty standard routine of climbing up to around 10 kilometers, firing and defending is incredibly effective. If you notch to the left and pitch down, anything that doesn't get chaffed is almost never going to have the energy to keep itself on an intercept trajectory. I'm going to start overlaying my sensor view clips with the live clip where I think it's appropriate, like I have been doing in my tournament videos. Now for this particular clip, you'll see one of these AMRAAMs bites on the chaff, but the other finds me again after I leave the notch slightly. But watch how it just doesn't have the energy to keep its lead trajectory. It's slowly falling behind me and eventually just falls into the ground. I have a ton more similar clips like this, but I'm probably at risk of boring you to death, so let's move on to a game with some actual kills in it. Start of this game is one of those rare ones where no one really contests you at the start at altitude. These games are huge opportunities, so try to cash in if you can. There is one contrail ahead of me, but I'm not getting any RWR pings, so I'm happy to let him push me whilst I lob some missiles into the enemy pack down low. I'm happy for him to push me because in my eyes, I'm in a Eurofighter. Unless it's a Rafale, I'm confident I'll win the close range joust. Now I recently made a short about cyclic versus manual targeting, and I'm going to show you why I prefer cyclic in this game now. I'm going to notice a flanker climbing up by their contrail, and I'll just pause it quickly just so I can talk through this. I'm also going to overlay that short just with no audio, just so you can watch that while I'm in this freeze frame just to get an idea of what I'm talking about, but do check out that short if you want to see my comparison of both. I'll highlight where the target is so you can see a bit easier. Now I'm not certain of his range, so I don't want to fumble my HMD if it is beyond 20 kilometers. So in this type of situation I prefer to recommit with TWS, as I've shown you in videos before. This is because once my radar picks him up, cyclic targeting will cause my TWS to snap to a soft lock. This allows a smooth and quick launch without touching my radar controls, and it also means I can maintain my defensive posture very easily. If I were using manual targeting, I'd have to estimate the range on my radar scope to pre-position the targeting queue, or else I'd have to move the queue manually once I see him on TWS. This is additional workload in both scenarios for me and just generally less efficient. Now I'll let the clip play through and you can see this in action in an actual game. So you see how my TWS snaps to the target just as I get him within the scope. I get the launch off, and then I notice the other contrail, and I know that is probably within 20 kilometers now, so I am just going to switch to the HMD just to get that quick launch off. Part of getting good at top tier, I think, is understanding your radar modes and what the best one for each situation is. I relock the flanker there just to see if he's notched the missile. I don't fire again because I can see on my radar screen that it's still tracking him, and I pick up the kill there. And now I'm in a good scenario. I've got command of the altitude, so I can look for some top-down attacks, and I'm just going to cut ahead slightly. Now, one thing I've mentioned in the past is how I don't like being wasteful on long-range launches at the start. And at the start of this game, I fired 3 missiles down low on the enemy pack and only got 1 kill. In hindsight, I'd rather have these missiles now as my targets are preoccupied and closer, as it is I just have the 1. So it's worth noting, especially when you are somewhat unopposed at the start like I was here, to maybe hold on to your missiles a bit longer, depending on how big your loadout is, of course. Obviously, in something like an Su-30 SM, you want to be spamming at the start because you just have the missiles to do so. I do pick up a kill with my last missile though, and then we get into this nice position here. Another advantage to climbing at the start is your 9Ms are going to be most powerful when fired from above at distracted targets. They're very hard to flare accidentally. You need to make a focused attempt to flare a 9M usually, so if you get someone unawares from top down with a 9M, they've got a lot more range. They already have decent range anyway, and they're just going to be very hard to get rid of, and I pick up 2 kills there with the 9Ms. And then at the end here, I'm just going to swoop in, get a cheeky pilot snipe on this F-16 as he's pretty much already dead, just to sneak an extra kill credit into this game. So this next game I actually turned record on slightly late, but all you've missed at the start here is I just fired at 2 people down low ahead of me, and one of those is going to collect the kill. And then I thought I'd do something different. I've synced up sensor view, and I'm going to show you the main focus POV and sensor view for this sequence of events. Now I'll just have the live POV bottom right just so you can see the RWR on the left. Now first up, I'm going to get fired on by this Su-30. You see how he's data linking it at the start there, so I just put a cloud of chaff in the air. I sharply pitched down by neg-G'ing, and you see how the missile just continues floating on its IOG path above me to get rid of that one. Now obviously I'm turning in to engage this guy using my HMD. I get the missile off. This is perfectly good range, you know, despite the fact AMRAMs aren't good close range. 8 kilometers it's going to comfortably pull in there, that's no issue. And then I'm pre-preparing my defense. Most people, when they've accepted their demise, will just try and take you out and take you along with them. So he fires 2 R-77s. I do flare just in case he's fired an ET or something. And this is your classic angle gating IOG scenario that I've spoken about in the past. You'll see how the missiles start to see the chaff as I get into my notch, but you know, you see the grey IOG cones popping up. They're staying on a rough trajectory, so I just pitch up. It's only a slight bit of pitching up in my notch, and that's enough to get out of the inertial guidance of those missiles. Now a Hornet's going to show up on my back right. Not too concerned here. Eurofighter is, you know, more than capable of dealing with being on the back foot. Missiles behind me, so I pull into it slightly whilst chaffing heavily. That causes it to bite, and then I'm going to pull in for the HMD shot with the AMRAM. 3 kilometers, usually an AMRAM might struggle here, but you see how slow that Hornet was. If he's slow, it means he doesn't basically have the ability to outpull that AMRAM. 3 kilometer shot against someone going over Mach 1. If they pull correctly, you can often outpull AMRAMs in those situations, but that Hornet was simply too slow. Last game I'll voice over now, and at the start here I'm just firing on an F-15 and a Eurofighter ahead of me. My target prioritization at the start when I climb is usually on the people furthest to the left or sort of central map. If they've got people altitude far on the right, I usually deem that as a wasted missile. You know, I spoke about not being wasteful, but you do need to contest the altitude. Those 2 guys are in very aggressive positions that I fired at, so I need to at least put pressure on them. Otherwise, they're just going to have free reign over my team. As it is, they both opt to fly straight into my missiles. I'm not going to complain. Obviously, you know, that's not going to happen all the time. Any missile at that kind of range is very easy to defend if you're actually trying to defend it, but it is worth noting that, as I mentioned earlier in the video, those really high altitude launches can catch you off guard, especially in, say, like that F-15E, because if you wait till it pops up on your RWR at 10 kilometers, you're going to take a long time to pull around into the notch. and that missile is going to be going seriously fast and it's going to catch you very quickly. Now I'm data linking a missile into this flanker, trying to secure the kill. Now it does actually retrack him here because he leaves the notch slightly. He ended up defeating this kinetically. I did have a look in sensor view. Again, that's the power of data link. That would have got me a kill there if the missile had still had enough energy to make the hit, but as it is, it just falls behind him. So I fire a second missile to secure that kill, and as I hold the lock for some more data link, I get some targets pop up below me. Again, the value of contesting the altitude is realized here. I get the good top-down aspect to fire my 9Ms and get my last AMRAM off. They get the kills on the two Su-30s, and then the Hornet is crit or severed, and he popped up in the kill feed later this game. What I want to look at now though is the POV from one of those flankers. So as this sequence was playing out, you may have noticed one of the flankers said they were notching in the chat, so I thought I'd take a look at the sensor view, and this is something I encourage people to do quite a lot, is if you're ever not sure what happened, take a look in the sensor view. That will almost always tell you exactly what happened. So let's cut to the sensor view now. So first up, we see my initial missile being data linked in and then retracking, but we also see how it just doesn't quite have the energy to make the connection and falls behind him. It's close, but it is defeated kinetically. Now as my second missile starts to come in and you see the data link, I'm just going to pause it here, and I'm going to pause this a few times because I think there's a few things to talk about in this defense. So the first thing to note here is when there is a circle around the missile warning on your RWR, that is telling you it's a new contact on your RWR. He knew I was pushing him as well, so should have seen the launch visibly. The reaction to this launch was quite slow. He doesn't turn into the notch, change trajectory or chaff early enough for my liking. In this freeze frame here, we can actually see my missile is ahead of the 90 degrees, and I'll play it through and pause it again just as he does reach the notch. Now we see the IOG cone of the missile, meaning it has been notched. I know it says track on the missile card, but this information tends not to update instantly, as I've mentioned in the past. The fact is, we see the IOG cone, and when it plays through, you'll see the missile state briefly switch to inertial guidance and data link. Now again, he didn't turn into this notch, he just kind of drifted into it, and there's still been no chaff or trajectory changes, so it's still a danger, of course. Let's resume briefly as he does start turning and chaffing now, and look at what the missile is doing before I pause it again. So he did actually manage to successfully get this missile to bite on the chaff briefly. You can actually see it in the missile's flight path here. The problem is he did not maintain his notch. He turned through too much, and now the missile is behind the 90 degrees. Because he's still within the FOV, it saw him again and relocked. From this point onwards, he makes no further defense, so these are the final two lessons. First, if your RWR isn't shutting up, there's a pretty good chance that the missile is still a threat. So if he turned back into it and chaffs very aggressively, he may still have survived. Second is remember the notch angle is always changing. Maintain that missile at your 90 degrees, because if it gets ahead or behind you a little too much, it's going to relock you, and this happens. And that is all for today. Touching on what I just mentioned, if you don't know how you died, check your sensor views back. Looking back at my replays is a large part of what got me to this level in the game. Don't let yourself be angry or get frustrated at some perceived unfairness. The vast majority of the time you will have just made a mistake, and I say that from personal experience. Treat your deaths as learning opportunities, and you will find you become a better player as a result. Then by extension, the game becomes much more enjoyable. If you really can't figure something out, feel free to jump on my Discord server and pop a link to a server replay with a rough timestamp. I can usually find the time to take a look and provide some help. Failing that, there's plenty of good players on there who might also be able to take a look for you. Apologies for the infrequent uploads over the last month or so. I frequently burn out and take breaks from AirRB. Just in the past, I wasn't trying to maintain a YouTube channel, so it didn't matter. I didn't want to force uploads for the sake of it because I felt the quality would suffer, and I hope the fact I was motivated to make this particular video now is reflected in the quality of the content, but that's for you to judge, of course. In any case, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again next time.